Hello and welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. I am Halli Casser-Jayne, and the impeachment train rolls along, rolling down the impeachment tracks. The Democrats conducting an effective campaign against Donald Trump, while Trump appears to flounder in response more than any time in his presidency. It's a whole new political world this week. Will Trump be tossed from office, take up residency in the old pokey? Joining me at my table on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show is my partner in politics, former White House correspondent Matthew Cooper, for our weekly commentary on the state of American politics. And in our second half hour, how's this? A look inside the business of punishment with the author of American Prison, Shane Bauer. Perhaps Donald Trump ought to tune into this show. Matt and I begin. Okay, Mr. Matthew. Well, here we are. And you know what I think? You know what my first thought is that I wanted to say to you?
You're mad at Nancy Pelosi.
No. Listen to this. The Dems finally threw mud up against the wall and it's stuck. This impeachment train is running down the tracks.
I think by mud you don't mean like false charges.
No. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, right. No, I don't mean that. You know what I'm saying.
Right. You mean that they're on the impeachment train and there's plenty to work with.
There's plenty to work with, and it's steaming. You know, it's working.
Right.
I mean, it's, you know, every other time they've gone after this guy, within days he was able to manipulate it. I think what we have here is a failure to manipulate.
Yeah, well, we're a long way from, George Papadopoulos meeting with an Australian and talking about this and that. Wow. And,
yeah, gosh.
Feels like as ancient history as Egypt, under the pharaohs.
I'm pretty fascinated how this thing is moving along and how it's playing. Of course, the big intrigue today, there's a lot, but one of them, of course, is that the State Department IG called for an
Inspector General, right?
Okay, called for an urgent briefing. It was weird, the timing of this, on the heels of Pompeo kind of saying that he was aware of the infamous Trump-Zelensky call. Now we know even more this morning, but this was last night, and his saying that he and his staff will not testify before the committee. You got any?
Yeah.
You got any feeling on this?
Well, let's just have some nostalgia for Rex Tillerson and Jeff Sessions, because
yeah, tweeted that.
At the time, they seemed so odd, so inappropriate, and now they're looking like Dean Acheson and.
I mean, it's amazing, right? We have come a long way down.
Yeah, it's very different world.
You got any feeling on this thing and why he might have called this?
I mean, it's moving so fast. Apparently Pompeo is all over these efforts to get, foreign leaders to pursue this crazy theory that, the Ukrainians worked with Hillary Clinton to subvert the 2016 election, and they apparently, Pompeo at State Department or his minions, warned people not to, take care of their whistleblower rights. And so the Inspector General, who is the watchdog of the agency, is in full revolt, and he's gone to Capitol Hill, presumably to complain about Pompeo. So what began as Trump's, a very controversial phone call to the Ukrainian president has now metastasized to include the Secretary of State, as well as the Attorney General, who we'll get to in a minute.
The thing about Pompeo is, first of all, it's not normal for a State Department guy to be involved in such a conversation. I mean, that's been made clear all over the place. With the only exceptions being some Republicans trying to give him cover on this.
You mean listening in on the Ukrainians.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, right there you go. What? But Pompeo, who has he turned into? Former senator, Harvard grad.
Well, he's an interesting figure in his own right. I mean, I believe number one in his class at West Point. Harvard lawyer, as you said. He's a very, very intelligent guy.
But
he's always, he was a super Benghazi, truther on that, Benghazi committee. I mean, he's very, very partisan, willing to nurse conspiracy theories when he was in the House. And, apparently he's done some things that were better than Tillerson at the State Department. He's clearly brought that sensibility to the office. So it's pretty crazy.
This whole conspiracy theory thing. I mean, Trump got himself elected on conspiracy theory, so let's start there. Help me out on this.
Well, of course. I mean, birtherism is what gave, Trump his star, the idea that Barack Obama was not an American citizen, which is madness. And, everything about the, immigration, was, wild too. I mean, look, now he's in full InfoWars. He's kind of beyond Fox News now. He's really in full InfoWars.
Oh yeah, he's Sebastian
wacky
Gorka.
Conspiracy theory. Yeah, and I thought it was very telling that a few days ago, his former Homeland Security advisor at the White House, Tom Bossert, was on TV saying that this, this idea that Ukraine and Hillary manipulate the elections is been debunked and is nuts.
I just want to talk about Republican Party and these conspiracy theories because it is everything they're about. It's all they're about. And was that the way it was before Trump, before Obama?
No, I mean, I think
this is nutty stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Romney campaign, it was part of a continuum of, we want less government, we want a stronger defense, we want, lower taxes. It was a consistent, you could disagree with it, but it was grounded in,
reality.
Planet Earth. It was not tinfoil hats.
Right.
And, ranting in the park.
It's just so crazy. I don't know if you saw it, but, Zeb Gorka, who, had worked in the White House and got thrown out, this, born in Britain, goes to Hungary, gets involved, in right-wing crazy. I guess he was thrust out of Hungary, which is pretty hard for his right-wing stuff. Lands back here, now he's up with that InfoWars, all of them all together. If you do anything on Twitter, go find, some of the video that this guy posted last night.
Yeah, I mean, he's always had stuff about, he's still in full rant about Obama, that Obama's going to get arrested.
It's bizarre stuff. And this is now mainstream Republican. I mean, we all have to think about this. This is I'm going to use the analogy, but it's beginning to sound a lot like Nazis. I'm sorry. I have to say that. It's all so off and it's normal, quote unquote. The Secretary of State, Matt, perpetuating this stuff. He was on, Gorky, what's his name? He was on Pompeo's plane to Italy.
That's true. As a member of the press. But I'm sure he got a little special time up in the cabin.
Of the press? This is
he does have this crazy radio show, but yes. You
hear what I'm saying? You hear where I'm going?
No, look,
this is like some scary stuff. I'm sorry. I'm beginning to get a little frightened for some of what's been going on. I'm not sure people, I don't want to be hysterical. I'm simply saying the hair on my back is going up. I got pretty good instincts.
Well, things you did have the president saying that chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, should be arrested.
Right, or a civil war.
Alluding to a civil war. I mean, this is,
So I'm saying to you, we keep saying, here's where I'm going with this. We keep saying, oh, it's Trump. Oh, this is just how he rolls. This is how he manipulates. This is his PR thing. No, this really is who these people are and what they truly and honestly believe. And when they believe it so emphatically that they'll go to any lengths to make sure that their will is right. They are sending Attorney General Barr all over the place to find out fact that isn't fact on deep state. They are using the office
right.
the Attorney General.
Right.
This is crazy stuff. Come on. I don't think we're upset enough about it. That's my point.
Just to review, I mean, they asked the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut to do a special investigation of the origins of the Russia investigation. And at the time, that seemed like a little bit of a throwaway to appease Trump. But that now it's clear Barr is like personally supervising that investigation, which is like attorney generals don't do for anything. And he's not only doing that, but he's, talking to foreign leaders, and he's all over it, and they're pressuring allies to work on it, and, to nurse these theories that it was all, deep state, as they put it, efforts to oust Trump, and oy.
Well, so listen to what I'm saying to you. He even went so far as to replace attorneys, in the Southern District in New York, because he wasn't getting what he wanted for Trump there either. So let's just go how really off the rails this attorney general is. But I have to say, let me reiterate my point. These people believe in where they are and what they're doing. They believe all of this. They're putting their reputations and their lives and everything they've had in the past on the line because this is what they believe, Matt. Not because it's some game that Trump has them involved in. This is who are in control of the American government. Now, Trump said the word coup the other day, right? Yesterday.
Yeah.
What I'm saying to you is, whose coup? Again, I don't want you to think I'm hysterical because I'm not. I'm looking at facts and I'm saying all is not right here. Weird stuff is going.
I never use the word hysterical.
Well, not you.
But yes, I know what you're
somebody
saying.
could say, and I hesitate to go down this road. I see why other people don't, but they'll say it to me off Twitter, off Facebook, offline in phone calls to me. Big people, important people you and I know. I get this. I have these but nobody wants to say it because they're afraid that they're going to look like idiots. I'm going to say it. People are wondering what the hell is going on now. Right before we went on air, Putin came out defending Trump on a call with Ukraine. He defended that call that Trump had with Zelensky. That's just crazy.
I mean, when you put all this latest stuff in the context of Trump not wanting his conversations with Putin recorded, grabbing the notes from the translator,
putting it on the server, all this crap that we think is on
the server. I mean, you can only imagine what his phone calls with the Saudi leader.
Oh my gosh, right?
Mohammed bin Salman MBS are like. So, Salman.
So give me, I'm not completely off the wall.
Well, I think the Nazi analogy is a little imprecise. I think it's more, and I don't think it's much better. It's a little more sort of Stalin and purges,
Okay, but you have to help if you go back to the history of how they took over, how Hitler took over Nazi Germany. It was doing this kind of stuff and believing this kind of stuff. There is a correlation here, and let's not forget that the book that Trump allegedly leaves on his bedside is Mein Kampf, which has got the whole, how you do it in the PR game. But all right, you can, if you got a better analogy, I'll go for it, and that's fine. But can we both agree this isn't looking really cool? This
the most serious thing is the question was always, are there guardrails around Trump, either institutional ones like the courts and Congress, or that the people who stayed there were going to be, try to keep him from his very worst instincts. But now Pompeo and Barr seem like even more than enablers. They seem participants, like enthusiastic allies.
Okay, so right? Can these people have been bought?
I don't know if they're bought or they're believers. I don't know if they needed to be bought.
I don't know. I'm just saying that I think that,
and I don't know which is worse. But it's. I mean, nothing has been reassuring about Pompeo or Barr's actions in the last 2 weeks.
And then you get back to the IG meeting this morning and you just wonder, because he always said from the get-go, this was critical.
Yeah, I mean, on a slightly more optimistic note, I mean, the Inspector General at the at the intelligence community and at the State Department have been, clearly pushing back against all this, as to a degree did the Director of National Intelligence, speaking before Congress last week. So anyway, a lot of moving parts here.
A lot of moving parts. Let's get to some. You want to get to positive? I'll get to some sort of positive. I won't call it positive. The polls are showing up. They're 10% up since last week on the rise, going for impeachment. Those numbers, that 10% is a rise among Democrats, but more importantly, among independents. I think that in a week, that's a pretty good jump. And that means people are, paying attention. I don't know that you'll ever get the MAGAs. I don't think you'll ever get them, unless they're absolutely forced to. But I do see that as a good thing. But on the other side of that, Dems have a messaging problem, Matt. For all the good stuff that is going on here, only 4 in 10 Republicans think that Trump mentioned Biden in the Ukraine call, even though Trump admitted to doing so. I know there's a lot of roar on Capitol Hill amongst Republicans because they don't think Trump has a war room, a la, what happened during Clinton's impeachment. But there is that. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the Republican Party is in, both voters and politicians are in thrall of Trump. And so, it's been this way for a couple of years now, and this has not changed it. I don't know if Democrats have the ability to change it.
I think that it has changed it. I think that Grassley, even though he has a history of being for the whistleblower, Moscow Mitch, even though it's not that he's locked in because he's a clever man. He's saying if they go to impeach, they'll have a hearing, they'll have the trial. So I think that's something. But I also think that you're something. I hesitate to bring his name up but I'm going to do it. Okay, you know who Eric Erickson is?
Yeah.
Okay, so Eric, conservative of all conservatives. He's an interesting guy to follow on Twitter.
Right. He used to run Red State, right? Right,
because one side, he says one thing out of one side of his mouth and then another on the other. But he did post last night that he's hearing rumblings. He said, don't get excited, but there are rumblings that the Republicans, not that they believe any of this is bad, this, that, or the other, they're just exhausted by having to defend Trump all the time, and they're thinking Pence might not be such a bad idea at this point. Hello.
Right. No, that's kind of been in the air too.
I think Pence goes down with Trump, by the way, but that's another story.
Well, I don't know. It's all moving quickly, but anything's possible in this kind of atmosphere. But I think you would need more of a free fall of Trump's popularity among Republicans, to get 16, 17, 18 Republican senators to vote for impeachment just still seems all but impossible. You remember, all these guys live under the threat and fear of a primary challenge. And, I
get all of that, but I also get at some point.
Yeah,
Trump really screws this up, which he so far is doing.
Sure, anything can happen. It could just completely
it was the same way with
collapse.
Nixon too, right? It collapsed at the end.
But such a different world.
Well, yes and no.
A different Senate,
yes,
Barry Goldwater,
yes,
no Fox News.
Well,
it's just...
Well, Fox News is in a pickle, aren't they?
Well, sure. I mean, the real...
They're letting that out, by the way. They're floating.
And by the way, I watched Chris Wallace on Sunday.
Oh, he was terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the most. I think in general, it's kind of the best of the Sunday shows.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. He's I mean, I'll pick on Stephanopoulos, who I thought he's just too kind, and
Well, I thought he was pretty good with. He got Bossert, which was a big deal. And,
yeah, but I thought, was it Giuliani
and he and
that
Rudy.
I thought he was? I would thought his. No, I don't agree. If you're going to tell me he did a good job with Rudy, nope. He just let Rudy run.
But I thought Rudy was the. There was something to be said for that. But in any event,
there's always something to be said for that. But he'd already done that.
We haven't really talked
Chris.
about Rudy.
No, we're getting. Yeah, no, right. I just wrote that down on my little piece of paper here. That after this, we would go back to Rudy.
Yeah, people should know we're not sitting next to each other on this show.
Right.
You're in Florida. I'm in D.C.
Exactly. So it's always fun to play this, to do it this way. But okay. Back to Rudy.
Well, let me say, as one who, grew up in the New York area and lived in New York in the 80s and followed his career intensely, covered him a bit and know people who were friends with him. It's really an astounding transformation. I mean, he was always, as we said last week, he was always a prick. He was always a bit prone to ranting. I mean, I get all that. But, oh my God, his transformation into sort of incoherent rambling. I want a gerontologist to explain this, to look at video, because what has happened seems beyond the scope of normal aging.
Yeah, no, seriously, you're right. It's bizarre.
From his, when he was in his 50s as mayor to what we're seeing in his, late, is he 80 yet? He's got to be late 70s, approaching 80. It's pretty wacky.
It's very wacky. And there was a report last night or the night before, I can't remember which, so forgive me for not being specific on that, but that apparently Trump is just berating and belittling him when he comes into the Oval, and Rudy just takes it. Yeah,
I mean, I guess he's got to pay for his latest divorce, or you kind of wonder why he's doing this, but he seems... I
think you're on the right track on the first part. It's a gerontologist that needs to look at what's going on in his brain. It's nonsensical. But again, you know what, kiddo? We don't... what were people actually thinking, these crazy Republicans all along all these years? Maybe they weren't who we thought they were. I just mean
as a megalomaniac, his willing to be belittled by Trump.
I absolutely don't get it. But again, Trump has apparently an ability to get a very strange hold on people. And going back to that Hitler analogy, so did Hitler.
Well,
there's some people who have something that I don't know what it is. I've never been in the room with Trump. One of my best friends was very best friendy with him when she was alive. So, and loved him. And every other way, I thought she was like the most normal person. Maybe not.
Well, I think he's another one where the gerontologists can probably.
Well, I think that's all of us who are over a certain age. But I don't know, Matt. It's hard. It's hard to understand Rudy, right? It's hard to get why he would put himself in a circumstance like that. And this is going to cost him financially. I mean, I'm sure the GOP is going to cough up the money, but he already had to hire a lawyer, and it's just beginning.
Also, Trump does not have a history of paying his bills. I mean, this is the person's private lawyer. Well, I'm sure if he can throw the bill on the RNC, he will.
But he's off the wall, and he's making no sense. And again, I think what his, who knows? Do you think his game is just throw? His job is to take the incoming for Trump, and so Trump doesn't take it first off. I mean, that could be the role that he's been put into.
Yeah, it's not the job of a normal private attorney.
Right. But that's the Trump isn't normal either.
No, and it sounds like Rudy and Barr, according to reports, are fighting, which makes total sense because Rudy's acting like a roving diplomat.
And going back to Barr is trying to distance himself a little. What was the thing he planted the other day that, he didn't really, he didn't know that his name was going to be used like that, and he was offended that Trump used his name in the Zelensky call. Right.
Yeah.
So there's that too. But, they're all rats. It's a den of thieves. You know what happens at the end. Sooner or later, boom, it'll be over.
Well, they're either thieves or they're believers.
Well, that goes hand in hand, doesn't it?
Well, thieves implies they need money and lucre to be bought. I think you raised a more interesting question. Are they believers? They're not doubters. They're not just going along with it for power.
They're making money on it. They're all making money on it. They're making careers. They're building their future. I mean, there is that in there. But yeah, I do believe that they somehow are all believers, and that, as I said, that scares me more than anything. That's hard to fight. Quickly, I want to bring this up. How's Biden handling the Hunter story? And let me throw this out. I think he already won that story because that story's kind of drifting away. Your thoughts?
Well, it's, I think we're still early in this process. I think he's handled it well. And if anyone has the kind of capacity to do a how dare you attack my family, which he hasn't really quite done yet, he's got that in his hip pocket. Look, I don't know. I mean, it helped him that the New York reporter Adam Mentas, who did the kind of very long and authoritative piece about Hunter Biden in Ukraine, said there's really no evidence of anything illegal that Hunter Biden did, although it certainly raises eyebrows about his choosing to do business there in the first place. But,
I think that's a hard argument for them to make.
So far, it seems like this is not hurting Biden's campaign at all. But, we're still a long way to Iowa and still early in this whole crazy thing. So
right. And on that note, let me just also say this, Matt, that as far as it not hurting Biden, it's a odd track for the Trump people to go down. You got Junior right now making $50,000 a pop for making speeches all over the place, and he's got a new book coming out, and he wouldn't have that if his father wasn't the president of the United States. I mean, now it's not billions.
Hypocrisy is pretty rampant. Well, Jesus, this whole thing's about like putting things on the wrong server.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. So I think
lock her up.
Yeah. So there's a lot more we can talk about. We have run out of time. I mean, there's the election. We'll put that on hold till next week. Come back and we'll if nothing else crazy comes on, we'll certainly talk about the state of that. Right.
Plenty to discuss.
And we'll talk about everything from alligators, moats, and the ability to shoot migrants in the legs to Will.
Oh my goodness. All right. I'll catch you next time.
It's been swell. Talk to you.
All right.
Bye.
Night.
You were listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at HalliCasserJayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and on all your favorite apps. You can find the Halli Casser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Just say the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at the Halli CJ Show. In 2009, journalist Shane Bauer and 2 other young Americans went hiking in Iraq Kurdistan and unknowingly crossed into Iran. They were captured, and Bauer was held for over 2 grueling years in Iran's Evin prison. But that's just the beginning of a journey that would lead to Bauer writing one of the 10 best books of 2018, one of President Obama's favorite books that year. Now out in paperback, American Prison, a reporter's undercover journey into the business of punishment, in which Bauer gives us an eye-opening look into the corrections industry. The book based on Bauer's undercover work as an entry-level prison guard at a private prison in Louisiana. What a story. Let's talk with Shane Bauer. Hi, Shane.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, my goodness. I'm rattled. I read your book last night, and I am rattled. Unimaginable. Your story, what happened after that, what you've done, my emotions are just raw. Let's start with you. You were captured by the Iranians, held for 2 years in one of the most notorious prisons in the world. Tell us briefly that story, and then we'll go from A to B to C to D. Talk to me.
So I had been living in the Middle East, in Syria, where I was working as a freelance journalist in 2009. And I took a trip with a couple friends to Iraqi Kurdistan, and we were there for about a week. We went to a local tourist site, which was a kind of waterfall where, local Kurdish people go. And we went on a hike and unknowingly came near the Iran-Iraq border and were detained by Iranian border guards. And that led to 2 years in prison for me. 4 months of that was in solitary confinement. I was released in 2011. And when I came back home, I happened to come back at a time to California when there was a massive hunger strike in California prisons. Some 30,000 prisoners were protesting the use of long-term solitary confinement. So I had intended to go back to the Middle East, actually, and got kind of pulled into to American prisons. And I did a story about the use of long-term solitary here. There's people 20, 30, 40 years in solitary confinement in the United States. And from there, just got pulled deeper and deeper into, what is the largest prison system in the entire world. We have more than 2 million people in prison here. And several years later, I just, had gotten frustrated with how difficult it is to get access to prisons here and was interested in for-profit prisons, which are even more difficult to get access to than the already difficult public prisons. Because, they're private companies, so they have no, they don't have to abide even by public records laws. And so I had the idea of applying for a job on the corporate website of the Corrections Corporation of America, now known as CoreCivic. And I filled out an application. I didn't lie in the application. And, I didn't think it would work, to be honest. But within a couple weeks, I was getting, requests for job interviews from prisons around the country. And, I did some of these interviews on the phone, and they didn't ask me why I want to work in a prison. They didn't ask me about my job history. They just were essentially trying to convince me to take a $9 an hour prison guard job.
And off you go. But before we go into that, we have to go back because, look, you've been in prison. You're one of those rare ones. We all can't tell that story. Held for 2 years in, as I said, one of the most notorious prisons in the world. I bring that up, and I want you to share a little bit about that experience being in that prison, because you later tell us that maybe things are worse in our prisons in the United States, and you had one hell of a time in the prison you were in. Could you share a little of that experience?
Yeah, so I was in the central prison of Iran called Evin prison, and within that prison there is a ward for political prisoners. So I was held in, a solitary cell, and then I was celled with my friends, but otherwise could not, the prisoners didn't get to mingle with each other, so every cell is kind of isolated. But you find ways to talk to people. So I was in prison with a lot of pro-democracy activists and, went through a couple of months of interrogation. When I leave the cell, I'm blindfolded and essentially living in isolation for 2 years.
Did they beat you? Did they torture you? Did they not feed you? Describe the experience.
I had some physical altercations. I wasn't, beaten regularly, unlike a lot of the Iranian prisoners. They knew that we were high-value prisoners, and we were very quickly used as kind of political pawns with the negotiations with the United States. The real torture was solitary confinement. The solitary confinement is the UN considers it torture, after 2 weeks. Other prisoners were physically tortured. I sometimes heard, sounds of torture, but we were protected from a lot of that.
That's going to change a man no matter what, torture or no torture, just the experience of being in prison. So, okay, as a writer, you decide that you're going to do this story and you apply for jobs. But I want to talk to you about this privately owned prison versus federally run prison. I bet you most Americans aren't even aware of that, right? Give us a history of privately run prisons. There's a scene, by the way, forgive me for this, in Gone with the Wind, where she hires the prisoners. Those are people who are coming out of these privately owned prisons. It goes back at least that far, if not further. Talk to me.
I mean, it really goes back to the foundation of the penitentiary system, really to the days of the American Revolution. Our very first prison in this country was intended to be run at a profit. It was a state-run prison. You know, this is not very different from the modern-day corporate-run prison, but for a long time, the prisons were essentially factories. They were like cotton mills, and they were intended to bring profits into state coffers. Later on, you know, in the South, go to post Civil War, all of the Southern prison systems were privatized. So the states were leasing their prisoners to coal businesses, to cotton planters, and prisoners were essentially just filling the role that slaves had filled. They were still driven by the whip. They were tortured if they didn't meet quotas. And this system was called convict leasing was even deadlier than slavery. The death rate was in some states 1 in 4 prisoners a year, which was on par with Soviet gulags. Later, the states kind of took over these plantations and bought them and created prisons in the South. And a lot of the prisons throughout the South today are these former slave plantations. So, you know, there's been a kind of a thread really throughout American history of attempts to make profit from prisoners in various ways, which is something I also trace throughout the book.
So it's unfathomable to me. But I want to talk to you about this. So you come out of this horror hole and now you're going to put yourself back in it. What are you thinking? I can't even imagine why anybody who'd gone through what you went through to want to even put themselves. Now, I don't even care if it's in the power role. Why did you do what? What were you thinking?
Well, I mean, I guess, you know, I think in some ways, a lot of people are baffled by this. I get this question a lot, and I still don't exactly know how to answer it. But, you know, I will say that I think for a lot of prisoners who come out of prison, it's fairly common for people to kind of engage in prisons after they're out. And in some ways, it's a way to kind of make sense of your own experience. And it's, you know, empowering also. And I felt compelled to really kind of shine a light on this prison system here after being in prison myself. And I think also having been in prison, I think prison itself was just it wasn't as frightening to me as maybe would be for somebody who has no connection to prison. The idea of going back into prison as a free person was, you know, it was not as big of a deal, I think, to me. But that doesn't mean that it didn't play out in some ways, you know. I mean, when I was there, it's not as if I was thinking about my own imprisonment day to day. I was very present, actually. I mean, it was just an intense experience to be there. But, you know, there were definitely moments that it came up. I mean, I remember a time when I was a prisoner and we used to try to take extra lunch trays if there were any left over. It was kind of a regular thing that we did every day, and the guards were generally okay with it. But one day a guard kind of flipped out on my friend and separated us, and he almost beat me. And, you know, it was one of the more intense experiences in my imprisonment. And then later, you know, when I'm working at Wynn in Louisiana, the prison was put on lockdown. So prisoners were not able to go to the cafeteria for lunch, and we had to bring food to them. And I remember a prisoner taking an extra food tray, and I just kind of flashed at him. And, you know, I paused and was just like, wow, I'm completely on the other side now. And I'm just, you know, playing this kind of irrational role, and becoming this kind of tyrant that I had been victim to.
Okay. I was thinking of Patty Hearst syndrome or Stockholm syndrome and I wondered whether you were suffering, you know, a form of PTSD, and, you know, you go back and you try and, make friends, if you will, with the memory, even by acting out within that confine. So let's go to Wynn Prison, which is this is the job you decided to take as a prison guard, in this for-profit prison in Louisiana. Tell us a little bit about the prison.
Wynn is a prison of about 1,500 inmates. It's a medium security prison. It's in the middle of a national forest, the Casser-Jayne National Wilderness. And it's, you know, in a town with it's very poor. You know, I think the household average income is like $25,000 a year. So, the guards are generally from the town. They're people who are desperate for work. A lot of single moms were prison guards that, they needed health insurance for their kids. There were kids that took the job straight out of high school that became prison guards. The prison has, so there were for 1,500 inmates, maybe depending on the day, roughly 23, 24 guards. And, the guards the morale is very low. They're getting paid $9 an hour. There's essentially no reason for them to even attempt to kind of fulfill the duties they're meant to. So the prison is very chaotic. The prisoners kind of treat the guards as if they're mall cops. And, one of the themes of training was that, they're constantly telling us as soon as you start this job, prisoners are going to be telling you that, you don't make enough money for the job and you're going to be tempted to sell drugs or cell phones, which was very common. I mean, this is how contraband gets into prisons, is through prison guards. And with a private prison, it's just that the problem is even more severe because the guards are just so poorly paid. I saw one of the ways that the profit motive manifested was through the lack of health care. That was one of the ways that the company cut corners, was not adequately providing health care. And, just to be clear, the health care in the prisons across the country, whether public or private, is very bad. But with private prisons, the prison that I was in particular, there was the extra issue of, which is the fact that the company's contract with the state required that if the company sends a prisoner to a hospital, it has to foot the bill. So, the company is reluctant to do so because, if they're making $30-some per prisoner per day, and they send a prisoner to the hospital, which could cost thousands of dollars, they're not making money. So I met a man who lost his legs and fingers to gangrene, who had been complaining, for months at the infirmary of pain that was so severe that he couldn't sleep, and they would just give him Motrin and, send him back to his tier.
Shane, you have to explain to me, because this is something, do they have to answer to anybody? Is there any, the Fed prison has to answer to the feds. Who do these for-profit prisons answer to? I mean,
they are answering to the state or the federal government. So, the state is not off the hook here. I mean, it's ultimately their responsibility. They're contracting with these prisons. They are responsible for overseeing them. But the prison I was in, the day-to-day was not monitored at all. I did happen to be there at a time that the prison was kind of melting down in some ways. There was just so much violence. And the state actually stepped in while I was there at one point and brought in, they kind of took over the prison for a week. And it seemed in some ways like they were trying to kind of scare the company into thinking that they might have their contract pulled. And the company also sent in their kind of almost like a SWAT team that they have so they can deploy around their prisons. So they sent them in to kind of crack down. And, of course, there were no baseline kind of remedies. They weren't increasing the programs for prisoners or, improving security or anything like that. They just kind of, had a brief show of force, and then things just, went back to normal. And, this goes back, I think, points to the underlying issue of these for-profit prisons, which is, ultimately they're not reformable because the margin of profit is not huge with these companies. So, if the states did force them to, provide more security, more services, more healthcare, that stuff costs money, and their whole reason for existing, is
out
null.
The window. Sure, I understand that, but you wonder why they get into the owners of these things get into these anyway. If it's for profit, they need to make a profit, so that's just built into the whole, MO of the place. Right. So that's not a good thing. So right there, you're going, why in the world would we have something like this? Because it's, just by its very name, it's not doing what its job is really supposed to do. But if you're not even making a lot of profit on it, I mean, then that really gets scary, because then they have to tighten the belt that much more, make it that much more unbearable. I have to ask you though, you going in now in the power role, how you describe what happens to you over the few months. Talk to us about that. That's just goes to show you how who we are as humans and how easily we can become that which we don't want to become. So you go in the power role, the other side of the coin, and here you are in this seemingly hellhole in this power role. And then you describe in the book what happens to you, a man with backbone and education and, a good man who's been through some of this yourself, and you find yourself turning into something you don't even recognize. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Yeah, this was one of the more surprising aspects of this project, just what happened to me. I thought I would just be an easygoing guard and just kind of hang back, and this would be my way to just observe what's happening in the prison. And I quickly saw myself change. I mean, I realized that everybody in prison, draws a line somewhere. That's whether you're a prisoner or a guard, you have to kind of set a line and maintain it. Otherwise, you just get kind of, people walk all over you. So, I found myself, I would try to initially just help people out as much as I could. There were, prisoners were constantly frustrated by the fact that their programs were getting canceled because there weren't staff. Their corrections counselors just didn't bother to talk to them. So I would try to do what I could, and that was exhausting. I'm one of two guards in a unit of 350 prisoners who are on the floor dealing with prisoners face to face. And, some people would try to take advantage, and I would, write them up, like essentially punish them. And, when I did that, I would go home and I would feel guilty, think, what is going to happen to this person? And I realized really quickly that I had to turn that off, and I had to, just turn off any kind of compunction that I would have for, locking people up or punishing them. And when I did that, it made the job a lot easier. And, I found myself from there getting kind of, pulled into various conflicts with certain prisoners. And, it just became very personal. I would, go home and reflect about the larger system. And it was clear that there were so many problems with it, and that this was also feeding into the personal conflicts. But when I'm there, it's just, that stuff goes out the window, and it's just, oh, this guy is threatening me. How am I going to get back at him? And it was very hard to control that, and I tried to, and I just found myself becoming more and more authoritarian.
And one of the things that you learned right from the first day you applied for the job, they really don't give a hoot who you are or what you're about if you're willing to work for them for $9 an hour, because that's what they need as bodies to take the job. I mean, it's ugly business from at every turn that you show in the book. I couldn't, right? So it's interesting to me that how you found yourself, going down this hill. I have a friend who, the guy who used to do side work for me, who was a prison guard in Maryland. And the guy was a wreck. He'd been doing it for too long, and he was the first to admit it, but he had to work a little longer in order to get his pension, right? And he was drinking himself into a coma to get through the last couple of years. That's how bad it was. And I remember him once saying something to me about, he said, it's hard to draw the line between the prisoner and the guard after a while. I don't know who's worse, he said to me. And I don't know whether I don't have the character. I could have been a prisoner just as easily as I became the guard. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, I mean, I heard guards say that also in the prison, exactly that same line. I remember when I was in training, and, one of the trainees a lot of them were going through kind of, heavy internal kind of ethical conflicts. And one of them said, I've done things that are illegal, the guards would sit around talking about what drugs they did, and it felt like it was somewhat of chance of, who ended up on which side of the bars. And, some of the guards even knew prisoners from, their childhood. And a lot of the guards were themselves, as they were guards, they were drug dealers. So, it really kind of brought out, I think for everyone that worked there, it was clear how kind of, arbitrary in some senses, a lot of this was. And, some of them I saw kind of unable to make sense of it, and they would just quit. Others, I think, went down a similar path as me, just kind of, just hardening. And, that was their way to deal with it. And, prison guards across the country, they have higher suicide rates than, the population at large, really high rates of alcoholism, higher levels of PTSD than Iraq war veterans or Afghan war veterans. It's not a job that leads one to live a long and happy life.
No, for sure. Absolutely. Listen, these for-profit prisons are there because they're supposed to be saving somebody money somewhere on the federal government, right? Which is, they say, turn them over. It's kind of like what they were trying to do with schools now. Let's turn it over to the private people, and they're going to make money, or they're going to save us money. And, that's what's behind money. Money. You want to throw up from the word money after a while. Mr. Trump is all for these for-profit prisons, is he not?
Yeah. I mean, really, every president has been since at least this version of for-profit prisons since the 1980s. Trump, in particular, overturned an Obama-era decision. At the end of Obama's presidency, he announced that he would be, that the government's policy would be to not renew their contracts with private prison companies. So that meant that, private prisons would be phased out of the federal system. When he made this announcement, the stock price of these companies tanked. They dropped 50%. The day that Trump was elected, the stock price of the Corrections Corporation of America rose more than any company in the stock market that day. Very shortly after he took office, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, announced that the government would be reversing the Obama-era decision. So now, these companies are doing better than they were before Obama's decision, and they're also benefiting from, the immigration policy. The private prison companies control about 2/3 of immigrant detention population. So that is a, kind of growth area for them.
Right. And I think that says it all, doesn't it? Just want to end it now with this. A couple of things. One is, look, prison is a place for people who do bad things. They could be good people who did bad things, or they could be bad people who just did bad things, but that's what they are. And I think the other side of the coin, just to make this a fair conversation, is that we can't be too lenient either in the treatment of prisoners. And there seems to be a move to the left, I think, on all of that, particularly when we have white-collar criminals who are sent to places like Club Fed. That being said, you did the story, you've been through it yourself, you wrote the book. What do you think needs to be done? Should these things be shut down? Should there be better oversight? What's the solution here?
Private prisons should be shut down, no doubt. But that's just a tiny part of the problem. Ultimately, we have 2.2 million people behind bars in this country, and the issue of prisons is really just the last step of a long set of issues. People are in private prisons because we have such a huge prison population and we can't pay for it. So what really
the largest in the world, by the way. Can I interject that, Shane?
Yeah.
We have the largest.
Absolutely. By far.
We need to say that. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
But it's a huge issue. Even if we let out all the people who are in prison for drug crimes, for nonviolent crimes, we will still be the most have the highest rate of incarceration in the world. So we really need to change how long we're putting people in prison for, what we're putting people in prison for. It's just a massive systemic change that's needed, and we need to have way, way less people in prison. There's no doubt about that.
And the other side of that is we also have a problem with society today. Capitalism imploding, my friend. Absolutely. Great book. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Shane Bauer. His riveting book, a must-read, is American Prison, a reporter's undercover journey into the business of punishment. For more information about Shane Bauer, visit shanebauer.net and follow Shane on Twitter at Shane Bauer. Thank you for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is available at hallicasserjayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Be sure to visit us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Until next time, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.